It's interesting to see, to kind of go back in time and think about all the sets of events that led us to May 25th, 2020, and then here, what do we do in this new era and the new challenges that we face? Robert, what came to you when you heard Cedric talk about what the work he's doing now?
Yeah, a few things came to me. One is just the importance of leadership. One of the interesting things that we talk in the book, and Cedric and I, we were talking about this, is how many leaders in the police department that we spoke to who said, well, our officers, they had a history of using more force than they needed to. And that was just taken as a given, as opposed to thinking, well, you're running the place, why don't you fix it? And so knowing that there wasn't a lot of examination at the very top about how police officers are practicing policing, despite the complaints for the community, it's really fascinating to me. The other thing that I think is very important is even in a place like Minneapolis, which has a particularly pronounced culture about complaining about police, it's so easy for so many things to fall through the cracks. And I'm interested in seeing how the next 30 days and the next 30 days evolve in terms of this particular program.
Yeah, it was interesting when you talked about the 30 days, the Operation Endeavor, how it started kind of on a cultural, social level, and now you're bringing in the business community. Who do you think are the key stakeholders to peace in Minneapolis?
Well, one thing about, I think we've all have come to terms with is that when we think about policing in this country and we think about the issues that have created this environment for people such as George Floyd, who lived in the space that he did, and some of this at no fault of his own, but because of a larger systemic issue in this country around racism imposed itself upon him at certain places in his life, and how things potentially could have been different for him. Just because it was different for me and Robert and you don't necessarily mean it would have been different for him. But here's the thing I think that's important here to your question. When we think about policing, and we think about the social issues that create this environment where people have to rob, steal, and cheat, that put people on a trajectory for negativity and displacement for the rest of their lives. If we're able to interrupt some of that, would it make a difference? And I think it would. But police cannot fix that. We end up just being the responders to these events when they take place. Someone goes into a store with a $20 bill that's counterfeit, and it ended up in his death, right? When it never should have never even gotten to that point to begin with. But the point of it is that it did. So when I think about policing today, it's not just me and the police department doing a job to keep people safe. It's every entity in that community, including our business community. We have a large CEO, C-suite type of personnel there in downtown Minneapolis. They all want to take part. They all want to do something. They all want to be part of this change as we move forward. So one thing that I went to them with, I gave them opportunities to here's some things that you can help us do, and their willingness to do that. That will become the second part of this operation, because I just don't want it to be about police. I need it to be about the entire community itself. So the corporate community has a responsibility, and the larger community has a responsibility as well too.
That's wonderful. I have one question that's sort of a selfish question that I am curious about. It's going to take us a little bit off track, but I think both of you are fascinating to me because you have multiple roles, multiple identities in 2022. You're black men to start. But as a journalist, you have a responsibility to truth, to independence, to objectivity, to telling stories in a certain way. And sometimes that, those identities could conflict or work in concert. As a black cop, if I can put it that way, there are tensions and ideas there that I'm very curious for both of you. How do you balance your identities, so to speak, or your roles at a time that's so critical?
When I go out to do my job, which is not just to go to places where there are a lot of folks who look like me, but more often to go to places where there's no one who looks like me, it becomes clear how much my identity, both as a reporter and as a black man in that space, can seem particularly strange and particularly outstanding. What I do know is that it often allows me to ask questions that sometimes my white colleagues might take for granted. And usually, when we're doing this story about George Floyd, there would be times where I'd ask questions because I could understand the perspective as a black person. For example, one of the things that I really wanted to know was about his relationship to his body, because it just felt like an incredibly cruel contradiction to me that he had built it up so he could succeed in life. And then at the end of his life, it's his body that's the indicator for the police to execute the type of maneuvers that they did. Derek Chauvin says that they did it because he was a sizable man. And when I started asking those questions, people said to me, often black men said, no one ever asked about that before. But I knew how to ask that because I know about my relationship to my body. And so when I think about the way my identity kind of plays into a role as a journalist, which we talk about journalists being objective, when really the question is, are you being fair? It's something that I try not to step away from, and to let folks know that this is my perspective, this is where I'm coming from, and I want to have a good conversation with you about it.
That's great. How about you, Cedric?
Well, for me, being a black man in America, I've had all the experience that all other black men in this country have had, directly or indirectly, in some form of fashion. I'm much older than Robert. I'm a baby boomer. Shout out for all the baby boomers. This is the space we're in today. We see the world a little different, but I like Robert, and what I hear Robert saying, and something I certainly do resonate with, is the fact that for me, being in this role that I'm in, leadership role in public safety, being a national voice around public safety in this country. When people hear me or see me, they're asking me these questions about what I think is right or wrong. And I think regardless of what ethnic group we may belong to, regardless of what generation we may have been born in, or what our sexual preference is, or what our religion may happen to be, at the end of the day, it all comes down to doing what's right by people, for people other than yourself. That's how I see this work that I do, because it is about doing what's right. We all are very well aware of what the challenges are, have been, and still are in this country around many of the of the relationships among a variety of different groups. And so for me, when I make decisions, when I role model behavior, I'm role modeling behavior not just for black men. I'm role modeling behavior for everyone. It's like when Robert writes, his writing is not just for a particular group of people, but he's telling a story that can impact all of us in our own personal growth and development, because you can grow and develop from that book. So for me, and everything that I do, from my facial expression to my body language to words come out of my mouth, everything I do, this like you are doing right now at this very moment, people hinge on to it. But what I hope to do in the demonstration, my work, and I'm seeing that clearly in Minneapolis, and this is what I share with other leaders across the country and in that city, it's what we role model regardless of who we are. I notice challenges associated with being African American, a person of color in this country, but I also know what opportunities are if we, all of us, I, myself as a person of color, demonstrate the behaviors of how I think people should be thought about, how people should be treated, and how people should be interacted with. And let's understand something here. We have bad people that live among us. We have bad people that are going to have to be engaged by police, but they come in all sizes, shapes, and colors. But at the end of the day, it's how we treat people, regardless of who they are. And this is what's very important to me in the work that I do, because when you see me, you just don't see a guy, you see a black man that's in this role that we play, and then there is a certain level of expectation somehow that we should be better than others. That's a reality too.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Robert, you can close this out, because you wrote the book. You literally wrote the book on what got us to that day, and that day in itself actually changed policing for the future. I don't want to ask the question, are you hopeful? Because as we heard, that is an unfair question to pose. But how do you view, what is your prognosis for what lies ahead?
Yeah, actually, the concept of hope informs the last chapter of the work, which asks the question, well, what's the accumulating effect of this? What is it like to live with the knowledge that there are systems that are unfair, right? And what we conclude is that hope is almost the American defense mechanism, right? It's the belief that you have to continue going, because if you don't, the status quo is not good enough. So you continue to move. You saw that in George Floyd's family. And you saw what I felt was really stunning when we had conversations with the governor and the president, who sort of intoned that now might be the best shot, that if we couldn't have gotten it right in 2020 or 2021, we might not be able to get there in 23 or 24. Ultimately, though, it is not the president nor the governor that makes that decision. It's within the people who are in the country to make the decision about whether they continue to fight for change and move toward the world that they think is more fair and more just. And so at the end of the day, the thing that I learned and the thing that I think the reporting showed is that we are the ultimate holders of hope, and we get to define the world that we want to live in.
Thank you for that. Please join me in thanking Robert Samuels and Cedric Alexander.
Thank you.